Picture a marble fountain flowing with champagne, not champagne punch, pure French champagne. Cost? $50,000 in 1920s money. That's $800,000 today, for one night. But here's the thing. The fountain wasn't the scandal. The scandal was what happened around it. The wealthiest families in America, names you'd recognize, threw parties in their mansions with rules so twisted they make modern celebrity excess look tame. These weren't just wild parties. They were designed systems of corruption, predation, and social destruction. 15 rules governed these gatherings, rules that ensured silence, rules that normalized depravity, rules that created the criminal networks that would define organized crime for decades. Rule number 1. You surrendered your real name at the door. The butler didn't announce you. He took your invitation, wrote down a fake name you provided, and that's who you became for the night. No guest lists, no records. If police raided the party, nobody could prove you were there. If a scandal broke, you had plausible deniability. The system was designed for criminals who needed alibis and elites who wanted to pretend they weren't criminals. Rule number 2. Women had to check their morals at the door. This wasn't a metaphor. Mansions had literal coat-check attendants who asked female guests to acknowledge they were entering a space where normal social rules didn't apply. Some estates had signs, "Propriety ends here." The message was clear. What you did inside couldn't be judged by outside standards. Rule number 3. The richer you were, the fewer clothes you wore. Nude swimming pools weren't hidden in back gardens. They were centerpieces. See-through gowns made from silk so fine they cost $3,000, more than a car, were standard evening wear. The elite used nudity as a status symbol. Modesty meant you were too poor to risk the scandal. Rule number 4. Bring your own poison. Hosts provided the mixers, the ice, the crystal glassware. But guests brought their own illegal alcohol. Why? Plausible deniability. If the feds raided, the host could claim ignorance. The booze belonged to the guests. Meanwhile, everyone knew which politician's driver delivered the best Canadian whiskey and which society matron had connections to the Irish mob's gin supply. Rule number 5. Cocaine was served like after-dinner mints, silver trays, small spoons, casual distribution by servants in white gloves. The drug wasn't hidden in bathrooms, it was offered alongside cigars and champagne in the main parlor. Cocaine was legal until 1914, but by the 1920s, possessing it meant federal charges. That was the point. Every line you did gave the host leverage. Every guest was now complicit. Some hosts kept detailed logs of who consumed what. The records weren't for health concerns. They were insurance policies. A senator's cocaine habit documented across 6 parties. That's 6 votes in your pocket. A judge's weekly consumption tracked over months. That's a lifetime of favorable rulings. The servants who distributed the drugs were trained to remember faces, estimate quantities, note timestamps. The hospitality was surveillance. But the entry rules were just the beginning. Once you were inside, the real depravity started. The social rules weren't about etiquette. They were about creating a system where everyone had something to hide, everyone had leverage on everyone else, and silence was guaranteed. The parties weren't rebellion. They were business. And the business model was simple. Compromise everyone, protect no one, profit from the chaos. While newspapers printed stories about the moral decay of youth and the dangers of jazz music, the real corruption was happening in marble ballrooms where America's elite were building criminal empires one champagne toast at a time. The parties ran on a calendar. Every weekend during the social season. 50 parties per mansion per year. Multiply that across dozens of estates. Thousands of nights where the law didn't exist, where marriage vows were jokes, where addiction was entertainment. The scale wasn't accidental, it was industrial. Rule number 6. Married people wore their rings on the wrong hand. This was the signal. Right hand meant you were available for affairs. The system was so normalized that jewelers sold special party rings, duplicates of wedding bands designed to be worn on the opposite hand. Husbands and wives would arrive together, switch their rings in the foyer, and spend the evening with other people's spouses. The next morning, everyone went back to their proper families. Divorce was scandalous. Organized adultery was sophisticated. Rule number 7, servants were invisible, but they saw everything. The staff at these parties weren't just hired help. They were intelligence assets. Every mansion employed servants whose real job was gathering information: who was sleeping with whom, which politician was taking bribes, which society wife had a drug problem. The servants kept detailed records. Some worked for the hosts. Others worked for rival families, selling secrets to the highest bidder. The blackmail economy ran on what the invisible people witnessed. The best intelligence operatives were the bathroom attendants. They heard confessions, witnessed breakdowns, saw the drugs come out when guests thought they were alone. One bathroom attendant at a Philadelphia mansion kept a journal for 3 years. When she finally sold it to a rival family, the contents destroyed 2 political careers, ended 5 marriages, and triggered a mob war that left 8 people dead. She made $50,000. That's $800,000 today, for taking notes while handing out towels. Rule number 8. No real names, only nicknames. You introduced yourself as the banker, or Red, or the Countess. Plausible deniability for everything. If someone later testified about criminal activity at the party, they couldn't name names because they never knew them. Affairs, drug deals, political corruption, all of it happened between people who called each other by invented identities. The morning after, you could deny you were ever there. After all, nobody met you. They met the Duke. Rule number 9. The later you arrived, the higher your status. Midnight arrivals were peasants. 3 a.m. arrivals were royalty. The most powerful people showed up when everyone else was already drunk, already compromised, already vulnerable. They'd make their entrance, conduct their business, a bribe here, a threat there, a photograph for leverage, and leave before dawn. The early guests were entertainment, the late guests were predators. Some hosts scheduled the real business for 4 a.m. specifically. That's when inhibitions were gone, when secrets spilled freely, when people made promises they'd regret at sunrise. A corrupt police chief would arrive at 4:15, spend 20 minutes in the bathroom with 3 precinct captains, and leave with next month's protection payments arranged. A mob boss would show up at 4:30, have a 5-minute conversation with a prosecutor, and leave knowing which cases would be dropped. The late-night hours weren't party time. They were office hours for America's criminal class. Rule number 10. Bathrooms were for business deals, not relief. Every major bathroom in these mansions had a sitting area. Leather chairs, locked doors, soundproof walls. That's where the real transactions happened. Corrupt judges negotiated case outcomes. Politicians sold legislation. Mob bosses arranged territories. The parties were theater. The bathrooms were where America's criminal infrastructure got built, one private conversation at a time. The social rules were grotesque. But the exit rules, they were designed to ensure silence. To make sure that what happened inside the mansion could never be proven, never be prosecuted, never be exposed. The parties weren't just about excess, they were about creating a criminal class that was untouchable because everyone was guilty. The exit protocols were more sophisticated than the entry requirements. Because getting in meant you were corrupt. Getting out meant you'd stay quiet about it. The hosts understood that the real crime wasn't what happened during the party. The real crime was letting anyone talk about it afterward. So they built systems, legal, financial, social, that made silence the only rational choice. Rule number 11. You left through a different door than you entered. The mansions had multiple exits, front door for arrival, side door for departure, sometimes a tunnel to a garage 3 blocks away. Why? Witnesses couldn't track who attended. If a neighbor saw 50 people enter the front door but nobody leave, they couldn't testify about who was inside. The guests disappeared like ghosts. The parties officially never happened. Rule number 12. Drivers were paid double to forget routes and passengers. Chauffeurs made $30 per week in 1920s money. On party nights, they made $100. The extra cash came with explicit instructions. You drove nobody nowhere. If police questioned you, you were running personal errands all night. The cars were empty. Some drivers were paid even more to provide false testimony, swearing under oath that their employers were home in bed, while those employers were actually at the mansion doing cocaine off silver trays. The driver networks became criminal infrastructure. They knew which routes avoided police checkpoints. They knew which judges left their parties at what times. They knew which politicians were having affairs with which society wives. Some drivers worked for multiple families, cross-referencing information, selling route schedules to rival hosts. The most valuable drivers weren't the best at driving. They were the best at forgetting. One chauffeur in Manhattan worked for the same family for 15 years, drove them to over 200 parties, and when federal investigators finally questioned him in 1933, he testified under oath that his employers never attended social events. He retired wealthy. Rule number 13, if you got arrested leaving, the host's lawyer appeared within the hour. This wasn't a courtesy. It was insurance. The lawyer's job wasn't to defend you. It was to make sure you stayed quiet. They'd arrange bail, arrange a plea deal, arrange whatever was necessary to keep you from talking about who else was at the party. If you cooperated, your legal fees disappeared. If you didn't, the blackmail photos surfaced. The system was airtight. Rule number 14. Blackmail photos were the real party favor. Every mansion had photographers, not for memories, for leverage. You'd be drinking, laughing, enjoying yourself, and flash, you're now on film with a married woman who isn't your wife, or holding a champagne glass during Prohibition, or standing next to a known mobster. The photos went into files, organized by name, by scandal potential, by usefulness. When the host needed a favor, a vote, a permit, a legal ruling, the photos came out. You did what you were told, or the pictures went to newspapers. The filing systems were sophisticated, cross-referenced by person, by crime, by date, by leverage value. Some hosts employed full-time archivists whose only job was maintaining the blackmail libraries. One New York mansion had a fireproof vault containing over 10,000 photographs documenting 7 years of parties. When the estate was finally sold in 1935, the vault's contents mysteriously disappeared. Rumor was the new owner paid $100,000 just for the photos, $2 million in today's money. He wasn't buying memories. He was buying power over half of New York's elite. Rule number 15. What happened at the mansion never happened. Denial was mandatory. You signed nothing, but the agreement was absolute. If anyone asked, you were never there. You never saw anything. You never did anything. The parties were rumors, myths, exaggerations by jealous outsiders. Even decades later, survivors refused to admit attendance. The silence held because everyone had something to lose. The final cost? These parties normalized corruption. They destroyed families. They created the criminal networks that would define organized crime for generations. While industrial workers lost homes during the recession, while families starved, the elite played these games and called it sophistication. The parties didn't end because people developed morals. They ended because the Great Depression made them too expensive to maintain. Even corruption has a budget. But the networks survived. The blackmail files got transferred to new owners. The servants found new employers. The lawyers moved to new clients. The system adapted. This wasn't rebellion. It was a system designed to ensure the powerful stayed powerful, the corrupt stayed protected, and the truth stayed buried. And it worked. Most of the people who attended these parties died wealthy, respected, with their reputations intact. The few who talked were destroyed. The many who stayed silent were rewarded. These rules created the template for elite corruption that still exists today. The names changed. The mansions got bigger, but the system, leverage, silence, plausible deniability, stayed the same. Subscribe to Untold 20s so you don't miss out on any future videos. Because the 1920s they show you in movies. That's not even close to what actually happened, and we're exposing all of it.